Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The tenant who wouldn't leave. My name is Daniel, and what I'm about to share with you happened 4 years ago, though the memories still haunt me like shadows that refuse to fade when the lights come on. I was 23 years old at the time, fresh out of trade school, and had just landed my first real job as a plumber with Henderson and Associates, a well-established company in the suburbs of Portland. The pay was decent, better than anything I'd ever imagined making, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a real adult with actual responsibilities and a future stretching out before me. Growing up in my parents' cramped two-bedroom house with 3 younger siblings had taught me the value of personal space, something I'd never truly had until that moment when I signed the lease on my own apartment. It wasn't much to look at, just a 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an aging complex called Riverside Gardens, though there was no river anywhere near it, and the only garden was a patch of dying grass near the parking lot. But it was mine, and that's all that mattered to me at the time. The first few weeks living alone were everything I'd dreamed they would be. I could walk around in my underwear without anyone complaining, eat cereal for dinner if I wanted to, and watch whatever I pleased on television without fighting over the remote. The silence was golden, a stark contrast to the constant chaos of my childhood home where someone was always yelling, doors were always slamming, and privacy was nothing more than a distant dream. It was during my 2nd month at Henderson and Associates that I received a work order that would change everything. The address was for a house in Willowbrook, one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods where all the lawns looked like they'd been trimmed with nail scissors, and every house had those decorative shutters that didn't actually shut. The work order mentioned a problem with the kitchen pipes, something about persistent leaking that had been going on for weeks despite multiple attempts at DIY fixes. When I pulled up to the house that Tuesday morning, the October sun was struggling through a thick layer of clouds, casting everything in that peculiar grey light that makes the world look like an old photograph. The house itself was a modest 2-story colonial painted in a cheerful yellow that seemed almost aggressive against the dreary sky. The lawn was immaculate, bordered by beds of late-blooming roses that filled the air with their dying sweetness. I rang the doorbell and waited, my tool bag heavy in my hand, listening to the muffled sounds of movement from inside. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged couple who looked like they'd stepped out of a suburban lifestyle magazine. The husband, Roger, had that soft look of a man who worked in an office and whose biggest physical exertion was mowing the lawn on weekends. His wife, Patricia, was thin and nervous-looking, with hands that fluttered like birds when she talked. "You must be the plumber," Roger said, his handshake firm but brief. "Thank God you're here. That leak is driving us absolutely insane. We can hear it dripping all night long." Patricia nodded enthusiastically behind him, her eyes darting between me and something over my shoulder. I turned to look, but saw nothing except my van parked in their driveway. When I turned back, she was smiling, but it was one of those smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. They led me through their home, which was exactly what you'd expect from the outside. Family photos lined the hallways, showing the progression of their life together from young newlyweds to middle-aged parents. The furniture was all matching sets, the kind you buy from those big box stores, comfortable but uninspiring. Everything was clean to the point of sterility, not a single item out of place except for a pair of shoes kicked off near the stairs. "Sarah!" Patricia called up the staircase, her voice taking on that particular tone mothers use when they're trying to sound pleasant but are actually annoyed. "Your shoes!" There was movement upstairs, the sound of a door opening, and then footsteps on the landing. That's when I first saw her, and I wish I could say there was some kind of warning, some instant recognition of what was to come, but there wasn't. Sarah looked like any other 20-something woman you might pass on the street. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, wore ripped jeans and an oversized sweater that hung off one shoulder, and her feet were bare, her toenails painted a chipped black. She came down the stairs slowly, her eyes fixed on me the entire time, and there was something in her gaze that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't have said what it was at the time. It wasn't attraction exactly, more like she was studying me, cataloguing every detail for later reference. "This is our daughter, Sarah," Patricia said, and there was something in her tone, a tightness that suggested this introduction came with baggage. "Sarah, this is... I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Daniel," I said, nodding politely at Sarah, trying to maintain professional distance even as she continued to stare at me with those intense brown eyes. "Daniel," Sarah repeated, and the way she said my name made it sound like she was tasting it, rolling it around in her mouth like wine. "Are you here to fix things?" "The kitchen pipes," I said, already eager to escape to the safety of working alone under a sink. "He's very busy, Sarah," Roger said quickly, and there was definitely something there, some family dynamic I was walking into without understanding. Let him get to work. But Sarah didn't move. She stood there at the bottom of the stairs, blocking the path to the kitchen, still studying me with that unblinking gaze. "Are you single, Daniel?" The question hung in the air like a bad smell. Patricia's face flushed red, and Roger's jaw tightened. I felt my own face growing hot, unsure how to navigate this sudden awkwardness. "Sarah!" Patricia's voice was sharp now, all pretense of pleasantness gone. "That's inappropriate." Sarah shrugged, still not looking away from me. "It's just a question, Mom. He's cute. I'm allowed to think someone's cute, aren't I?" "I should really get to work," I said, trying to edge past her toward what I assumed was the kitchen. She stepped aside, but as I passed, she leaned in close enough that I could smell her shampoo, something floral and too sweet. "I'll be upstairs if you need anything," she whispered, and there was promise in those words that made my skin crawl. The kitchen was a relief, normal and mundane with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Roger showed me the problem area under the sink, apologizing profusely for his daughter's behavior. "She's going through a difficult time," he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Bad breakup a few months ago. She moved back home, and it's been challenging." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while examining the pipes, finding the problem quickly. It was a simple fix, a loose connection that would take maybe 30 minutes to repair. Part of me wanted to stretch it out, to stay hidden under that sink for as long as possible, but my professional pride wouldn't let me. As I worked, I could hear Sarah moving around upstairs, her footsteps deliberate and heavy, like she wanted me to know exactly where she was. Every few minutes, she would come to the top of the stairs, and I could feel her watching me even though I couldn't see her from my position under the sink. Patricia stayed in the kitchen the entire time, pretending to clean counters that were already spotless, making small talk about the weather and asking about my job. But her real purpose was clear. She was standing guard, making sure Sarah didn't come back down. "You seem very young to be a plumber," she said at one point, her nervous energy filling the silence. "I went to trade school right out of high school," I explained, tightening a connection with perhaps more force than necessary. "Always been good with my hands." I regretted the phrase the moment it left my mouth, especially when I heard Sarah laugh from somewhere above us. Patricia's face went rigid, and she turned on the water in the sink, letting it run loudly as if to drown out any further commentary from her daughter. When I finished the repair and emerged from under the sink, Sarah was standing in the kitchen doorway. Neither Patricia nor I had heard her come down the stairs, and her sudden appearance made us both jump. "All fixed?" she asked, but she was looking at me, not the sink. "Yes, all done," I said, gathering my tools quickly, eager to present the bill and escape this increasingly uncomfortable situation. "That's too bad," Sarah said, moving into the kitchen with a languid grace that seemed calculated. "I was hoping you'd be here longer. It gets so boring in this house." "Sarah, please," Patricia said, and there was genuine distress in her voice now. Let Daniel finish his work. I wrote up the invoice quickly, my handwriting sloppier than usual in my haste. Roger appeared as if summoned, checkbook in hand, clearly as eager as I was to conclude this visit. As he wrote the check, Sarah approached me again. "Do you have a business card?" she asked, standing closer than was comfortable. "In case we have any other problems that need fixing?" I did have business cards, a fresh box of them that the company had printed for me, but every instinct told me not to give her one. "The company number is on the invoice," I said, pointing to the carbon copy I was leaving with Roger. Sarah's expression darkened for just a moment, a flash of something that might have been anger or disappointment, but then she smiled again, that same intense, unsettling smile. "Of course," she said. "The company number." Roger practically pushed the check into my hand, thanking me repeatedly as he walked me to the door. Patricia followed, and I could feel Sarah's eyes on my back the entire way. At the door, Roger lowered his voice. "I apologize again for all of that," he said. "She's not herself lately." I wanted to ask what herself was like, but I just nodded and made my escape, breathing a sigh of relief as I climbed into my van. As I pulled away, I glanced back at the house and saw Sarah standing in an upstairs window, watching me leave. She waved slowly, deliberately, and even from that distance, I could see she was smiling. The rest of my workday was mercifully normal, just a few routine calls for clogged drains and running toilets. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that encounter had left me with. There had been something off about Sarah, something beyond just an awkward attraction or social inappropriateness. The way she had looked at me felt predatory, like I was prey she had decided to hunt. That evening, I returned to my apartment feeling exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. I ordered a pizza, took a long shower, and tried to wash away the lingering discomfort of the day. I was halfway through a beer and a mindless action movie when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but that wasn't unusual in my line of work. Customers often called directly if they had questions about their bill or needed to schedule follow-up work. I answered with my professional voice. "Hello." There was silence for a moment, then breathing, slow and deliberate. "Hello," I said again, already knowing who it was, my stomach sinking. "Hi, Daniel." Sarah's voice was soft, almost whispered. "I hope you don't mind. I got your number from the check carbon. Your company lists all the employees' cell phones on the invoice. That seems dangerous, doesn't it? Anyone could call you." I ended the call immediately and blocked the number, my hands shaking slightly. How had she gotten my personal cell? I grabbed the invoice pad from my tool bag and looked at the carbon copy. There it was, in small print at the bottom, my cell number listed as the technician contact. I'd never noticed it before, never had reason to. The phone rang again almost immediately, another unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but it rang again, and again. Different numbers each time, like she was using some kind of app or service to mask her real number. I turned the phone off completely, something I never did in case of emergency work calls, but I needed the silence. The next morning, I turned my phone back on to find 43 missed calls and 17 voicemails. I didn't listen to them, just deleted them all and went to work. I talked to my supervisor about changing my contact number on the invoices, making up some story about getting too many spam calls. He said he'd look into it, but company bureaucracy moved slowly. For a few days, things seemed to calm down. The calls stopped, and I began to think maybe Sarah had gotten the message. I should have known better. Crazy doesn't just go away. It waits. It plans. It was a Thursday evening, about a week after the service call. when I came home to find a small package outside my apartment door. There was no shipping label, just my name written in careful, feminine handwriting. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a photo of me, taken from a distance while I was getting into my van outside a job site. I recognized the house in the background, remembered the call from just that morning. She had been following me, watching me work. Under the photo was a note. "You look tired. You should take better care of yourself. I could take care of you. Love, S." I looked around the hallway, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. How did she know where I lived? How long had she been following me? I grabbed the package and went straight to my apartment manager's office, but it was after hours and nobody was there. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? A customer had a crush on me and left me a gift? They'd laugh me out of the station. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every car pulling into the parking lot sent me to the window to peer through the blinds. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, afraid to leave but afraid to stay. The next morning, exhausted and on edge, I made a decision. I would go to Roger and Patricia's house and tell them what their daughter was doing. Maybe they could talk some sense into her, get her some help. It seemed better than involving the police, more likely to actually solve the problem. I called in sick to work, the first time I'd ever done so, and drove to Willowbrook. The yellow house looked different in the morning sun, less ominous, more like the normal suburban home it was supposed to be. I rang the doorbell and waited, rehearsing what I would say. Patricia answered, and her face went pale when she saw me. "Daniel, is there a problem with the repair?" "No, ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you about Sarah." Her shoulders slumped, and suddenly she looked 10 years older. "Oh, God, what has she done now?" She invited me in, and we sat in the living room while she made tea neither of us would drink. Roger was at work, she explained, but she could call him if necessary. Then she asked me to tell her everything. I showed her the photo, told her about the calls, the package at my door. Patricia listened with her hands pressed to her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. "This isn't the first time," she said quietly when I finished. "There was a boy in college, and another one after that." She becomes fixated. We've tried therapy, medication, but nothing seems to help. She's not dangerous, just disturbed, I finished for her. Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes. "We'll talk to her. We'll make sure she understands this has to stop. I'm so sorry, Daniel. You seem like such a nice young man. You don't deserve this." I wanted to feel reassured, but something in Patricia's tone, the way she said Sarah wasn't dangerous, felt more like hope than certainty. Still, I thanked her and left, hoping parental intervention would be enough. It wasn't. That night, Sarah was waiting by my van when I got off work. She was dressed differently, more formally, like she was going on a date. Her hair was down, curled and styled, and she was wearing makeup that made her look older, more sophisticated. "Hi, Daniel," she said, smiling that same unsettling smile. "I thought we could get dinner." "Sarah, you need to leave," I said, keeping my distance, my hand on my phone ready to call 911. "This isn't appropriate. You're scaring me." Her smile faltered. "Scaring you? I'm just trying to be nice. I thought you liked me. The way you looked at me in my parents' house." "I didn't look at you anyway," I said firmly. "I was there to do a job. That's all." "You're lying," she said, stepping closer. "I saw how you smiled at me. You wanted me to follow you. You gave me signals." "I didn't give you any signals, Sarah." You need help. That was the wrong thing to say. Her face contorted with rage, and she screamed, a sound so loud and primal that people in the parking lot turned to stare. I don't need help. You need help. You're the one playing games, leading people on. She lunged at me, her nails raking across my face before I could react. I pushed her away, not hard but enough to make her stumble, and that's when she really lost it. She threw herself on the ground and started screaming that I had attacked her, that I was trying to hurt her. Thank God for witnesses. Several of my co-workers had seen the whole thing, saw her approach me, saw her attack first. When the police arrived, they took statements from everyone, and it was clear I was the victim, not her. Sarah was arrested for assault, but even as they put her in the patrol car, she was smiling at me, mouthing words I couldn't understand, or didn't want to. I thought that would be the end of it. She had been arrested. There would be charges, a restraining order. I was naive to think the system would protect me that easily. She was released the next day. Her parents had hired a good lawyer who argued that she was having a mental health crisis and needed treatment, not jail. The judge agreed, ordering her to undergo psychiatric evaluation and treatment. A restraining order was put in place, but it was just paper, and paper doesn't stop someone who doesn't care about consequences. The harassment continued, but now it was smarter, harder to prove. I would come home to find things slightly moved in my apartment. Nothing missing, but everything just a little off, like someone had been there, touching my things, lying in my bed. The property manager swore no one had access to my apartment, but I knew better. Sarah had probably charmed or manipulated someone into giving her a key. I would find notes in my van, tucked under the windshield wiper or slipped through the barely cracked window. They weren't threatening exactly, just disturbing. Rambling declarations of love mixed with accusations of betrayal. Promises that we were meant to be together, alternating with threats of what would happen if I continued to reject her. I went to the police again and again, but without proof that she was violating the restraining order, there was nothing they could do. The notes were unsigned. The handwriting could have been anyone's, and there were no cameras in my apartment building's parking lot to prove she had been there. My work began to suffer. I was exhausted from lack of sleep, jumpy and paranoid. My supervisor noticed and suggested I take some time off, get my head straight. But I couldn't afford to miss work, and besides, staying home felt more dangerous than being out in the world where there were witnesses. It was a month after her arrest that things escalated to a truly terrifying level. I came home from work to find my apartment door slightly open. I knew I had locked it, double-checked it that morning like I always did now. I called the police from the hallway and waited for them to arrive before entering. The apartment was destroyed. Every piece of furniture was overturned, every dish broken, my clothes cut to ribbons and scattered across the floor. On the walls, written in what looked like blood but turned out to be red paint, were the words, "You belong to me," repeated over and over. But the worst part was the bedroom. My bed had been slashed, the mattress gutted, and in the center of the destroyed bed was a photo album I didn't recognize. Inside were dozens of photos of me, taken over weeks. Me at work, at the grocery store, at the gas station. Some were taken from so close I should have noticed her, but I hadn't. The last photo was of me sleeping in my bed, taken from inside my apartment just the night before. The police took it seriously now. The vandalism, the clear evidence of stalking, the violation of the restraining order. They put out a warrant for Sarah's arrest, but she had disappeared. Her parents hadn't seen her in days, claimed they thought she was staying with friends. Whether they were lying or genuinely didn't know, I'll never be sure. I couldn't stay in that apartment. Even after the landlord had it cleaned and repaired, I couldn't sleep there knowing she had been in my space, touching my things, watching me sleep. I broke my lease, paying a penalty I couldn't really afford, and moved in with a coworker temporarily. But she found me anyway. She always found me. The calls started again, now from payphones and burner phones, impossible to trace. She would call my work, trying to get information about my schedule. She showed up at job sites, watching from a distance, but always just far enough away that technically she wasn't violating the restraining order's minimum distance requirement. My coworker, Mike, was a good guy, older, divorced, understood what it was like to have a crazy ex. But even his patience wore thin when Sarah started calling his landline at all hours, breathing into the phone, whispering my name like a prayer or a curse. "You need to handle this, man," he said one morning after a particularly bad night of calls. "I feel for you, but this is affecting my life too." He was right, but I didn't know what to do. The police seemed powerless or unwilling to do more unless she actually hurt someone. Moving hadn't helped. Changing my phone number hadn't helped. She was like a ghost, always there, always watching, impossible to escape. It was Patricia who finally gave me the solution, though she didn't mean to. She called me one evening, crying, apologizing for her daughter, for bringing this chaos into my life. "We failed her," she sobbed. "We knew she had problems, but we kept hoping she would grow out of it, that she would get better on her own. We should have gotten her real help years ago." "Where is she, Patricia?" I asked. "The police are looking for her." "I don't know," she said, and I believed her. "But I know she's not well. She's off her medication. Roger found her prescription bottles hidden in her room, all full. She hasn't been taking them for months, maybe longer." That's when she said something that changed everything. "We're moving. Roger got a job transfer to Phoenix. We're not telling anyone, not even family. We just need to start over somewhere she can't find us." They were running from their own daughter. If her own parents were that afraid of her, what chance did I have? That's when I made my decision. If running was the only option, then I would run farther than she could follow. I quit my job, telling my boss I had a family emergency back east. It wasn't entirely a lie. My family was in Maine, and this certainly felt like an emergency. I sold everything I couldn't fit in my van, closed my bank accounts, and got rid of my phone plan. I essentially erased myself from Oregon. The drive to Maine took 5 days. I paid cash for everything, stayed in different motels each night, and constantly checked my mirrors for any sign of her following me. Every woman with dark hair made my heart race. Every yellow car reminded me of that house in Willowbrook where it all started. My parents were confused but supportive when I showed up at their door, exhausted and paranoid. I told them the whole story, and my mother, God bless her, immediately went into protective mode. She set me up in my old room, helped me find a new job with a plumbing company that a friend of hers knew about, and never once suggested I was overreacting. For a few months, I thought it had worked. I slowly began to relax, to feel safe again. I got a new phone with a main number, started rebuilding my life. I even went on a few dates, though I was always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for Sarah to appear. But she was smarter than I gave her credit for, or more determined, or both. It was my younger sister who unknowingly gave me away. She had posted a photo on Instagram of a family barbecue, and there I was in the background, clearly visible, clearly alive and well in Maine. She had tagged the location, even mentioned that it was great having her big brother home. Sarah must have been monitoring my family's social media, waiting for any sign of me. Within a week of that post, she was in Maine. The first sign was a bouquet of flowers delivered to my parents' house, addressed to me. The card said only, "Found you, S." My parents wanted to call the police immediately, but what was the point? She hadn't done anything illegal. Sending flowers wasn't a crime. Being in Maine wasn't a crime. The restraining order was from Oregon. It had no power here. She didn't approach me directly at first. She just wanted me to know she was there, that I couldn't escape. I would see her car parked across from my work. She would be at the grocery store when I was shopping, always an aisle away, visible but not approaching. She had learned from her arrest, knew how to toe the line without crossing it. My family was terrified. My teenage siblings couldn't understand why this woman was stalking their brother. My parents installed a security system, cameras around the house. My father, who had never owned a gun in his life, started talking about getting one. The situation was becoming untenable. I was bringing danger to my family's door, and I couldn't let that continue. I decided to confront her, to try to end this once and for all. I found her at the motel where she was staying, a run-down place on the outskirts of town. She answered the door like she had been expecting me, dressed nicely, makeup perfect, smiling that terrible smile. "I knew you'd come," she said. "You couldn't stay away. We're connected, Daniel. Don't you feel it?" "This has to stop, Sarah," I said, staying in the doorway, ready to run if necessary. "You're sick. You need help. Your parents are worried about you." "My parents don't understand," she said, moving closer. "They never understood. But you do. You understand what it's like to be different, to want something so badly it consumes you." "I don't understand, Sarah. I don't understand any of this. We don't know each other. We've never had a conversation that wasn't you stalking me or me begging you to leave me alone." Her face darkened. "We've had plenty of conversations. Every time you looked at me, every time you smiled, every breath you took in my presence was a conversation. You just don't remember them right. You're delusional," I said, and immediately wished I hadn't. She screamed and launched herself at me, nails clawing, teeth bared like an animal. This time I was ready. I caught her wrists, held her back, but she was stronger than she looked, driven by rage and madness. "You love me," she screamed. "You love me. You just don't know it yet. I'll make you see. I'll make you understand." I pushed her back into the room and ran. I could hear her following, screaming my name, cursing me, declaring her love and hatred in the same breath. I made it to my van and locked the doors just as she reached me, pounding on the windows, leaving bloody handprints from where she had clawed her own palms in frustration. This time, when the police arrived, there were clear signs of violence, clear evidence of assault. She was arrested again, and this time the charges were more serious. Assault, stalking across state lines, violation of a restraining order. The federal involvement meant she couldn't just be released to her parents with a promise of treatment. She was held without bail pending trial. For the first time in almost a year, I could breathe. But I knew it was temporary. Even if she was convicted, even if she served time, she would get out eventually. And when she did, she would come for me again. My family and I made a decision together. We would all move. It was extreme, but after everything that had happened, it seemed like the only solution. My father could work remotely. My mother could find a new teaching job anywhere. My siblings were young enough to adapt. We would disappear, all of us, somewhere Sarah could never find us. We chose California, as far from Maine as we could get while staying in the continental US. We changed our names legally, a complex and expensive process but necessary. We deleted all social media, cut ties with all but the most trusted friends and family, who were sworn to secrecy about our whereabouts. It's been 3 years now. 3 years of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at unexpected noises, of scrutinizing every woman who looks even vaguely like Sarah. The fear has faded but never fully disappeared. It lives in me like a dormant virus, ready to flare up at the slightest trigger. I learned recently through a complicated chain of communication that Sarah was released 6 months ago. She served 2.5 years, got out early for good behavior and participation in psychiatric treatment. Her parents, true to their word, had moved to Phoenix, but she didn't follow them. Nobody knows where she is, or at least, nobody was willing to tell me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being paranoid, if she's moved on, found some other poor soul to fixate on. But then I remember the look in her eyes that last time, the absolute certainty that we belonged together, that nothing would keep us apart forever. I've built a new life here in California. I have a girlfriend now, someone who knows my story and accepts the precautions I have to take. We don't post photos online. We don't use our real names on any accounts. We live quietly, carefully, always aware that peace is fragile and temporary. But every time I see a woman with dark hair in a messy bun, every time I catch a whiff of that too sweet floral shampoo, every time an unknown number calls my phone, my heart stops. Because I know, deep in my bones, that Sarah isn't done with me. She's out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to remind me that in her twisted mind, I belong to her. The worst part is the guilt I carry about my family. They uprooted their entire lives because of me, because of a situation I brought to their door. My siblings had to leave their friends, their schools, everything familiar. My parents had to abandon careers they'd spent decades building, all because I fixed a leaky pipe in the wrong house on the wrong day. My therapist, one of the few people who knows the whole story, tells me it's not my fault. That Sarah's mental illness isn't something I caused or could have prevented. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are very different things. The guilt sits in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. I've thought about what I would do if she found me again. Would I run, fight, try to reason with her? The truth is, I don't know. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. But I'm also terrified of what she might do, not just to me but to the people I love. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if it would be easier to just give in, to let her have whatever twisted version of me exists in her mind. But then I remember the violence in her eyes, the blood on the walls, the complete disconnect from reality, and I know that giving in wouldn't save me. It would only feed her delusion, make it stronger, make her more dangerous. The strange thing is, I still fix pipes for a living. I couldn't give that up, even though it's what started this nightmare. But now I work for a company that only does commercial properties. No more house calls, no more meeting people's daughters, no more risk of another Sarah. It's safer, even if it's less personal, less satisfying than helping families with their problems. Every night before I go to sleep, I check the locks twice, check the windows, check the security cameras we've installed around our house. My girlfriend thinks it's excessive, but she doesn't push. She knows this is what I need to feel even marginally safe. And every morning when I wake up and everything is normal, when there are no signs of intrusion, no notes, no flowers, no evidence that she's found me, I feel a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I've survived another day, dread that this might be the day she returns. Because that's what stalking does to you. It doesn't just steal your sense of safety in the moment. It steals your future peace, your ability to ever fully relax, to ever fully trust that you're alone when you think you're alone. It changes you fundamentally, rewires your brain for constant vigilance. I've read about other stalking victims, joined online support groups under fake names, trying to find some sense of community, some hope that it gets better. Some people say it does, that eventually the stalker moves on, finds a new obsession, or gets help that actually works. But others tell stories of decades-long ordeals, of stalkers who never give up, who dedicate their entire lives to tormenting their victims. I don't know which category Sarah falls into. I don't know if she's out there right now, searching for me, or if she's moved on. The not knowing is almost as bad as the stalking itself. At least when she was actively harassing me, I knew where she was, what she was doing. Now, she could be anywhere, doing anything, planning anything. The prosecutor from her case called me once, about a year ago, to tell me she had been a model prisoner. She had participated in therapy, taken her medication, shown what appeared to be genuine remorse for her actions. The prosecutor seemed to think this was good news, that maybe she had actually gotten better. But all I heard was that she had learned to play the game, to say what they wanted to hear, to manipulate the system the same way she had tried to manipulate me. Last month, something happened that brought all the fear rushing back. I was at a hardware store, picking up supplies for a job, when I saw her, or thought I did. A woman with the same build, the same dark hair, standing at the end of an aisle, partially hidden behind a display. My body reacted before my mind could process, adrenaline flooding my system, my hands shaking, my breath catching in my throat. I abandoned my cart and left immediately, driving home in a panic, checking my mirrors constantly, taking a circuitous route to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got home, my girlfriend could see immediately that something was wrong. I told her what happened, and she held me while I shook like a child, embarrassed by my reaction but unable to control it. We spent the next week in a state of high alert, barely leaving the house, jumping at every sound. But nothing happened. No notes, no flowers, no signs of Sarah. Eventually, I had to accept that it probably hadn't been her, just some random woman who happened to have a similar appearance. But the damage was done. All the progress I'd made in therapy, all the small steps toward feeling normal again, evaporated in an instant. That's the truly insidious thing about this kind of trauma. It doesn't matter if the threat is real or imagined. The body doesn't distinguish between actual danger and perceived danger. The fear response is the same. The damage to your nervous system is the same. The exhaustion afterward is the same. My therapist says I have PTSD, which seems strange to me. I associate that with soldiers, with people who have been through war or terrible accidents. But she says that prolonged stalking is a form of psychological torture, that the constant state of fear and hypervigilance creates the same neurological changes as any other trauma. She's teaching me techniques to manage it, breathing exercises and grounding techniques, ways to pull myself out of flashbacks and panic attacks. They help, sometimes. But nothing really makes it go away. Nothing erases the knowledge that somewhere out there, Sarah exists, and as long as she exists, I'll never be truly safe. I think about her parents sometimes, wonder how they're doing in Phoenix, if they've found peace, or if they're living with the same fear I am. I wonder if they blame themselves for how she turned out, if they lie awake at night wondering what they could have done differently. I want to hate them for not getting her help sooner, for letting it get this bad, but I can't. They're victims too, in their own way. The truth is, I don't even hate Sarah. I'm terrified of her, yes. I'm angry about what she's taken from me, absolutely. But hatred requires a kind of energy I don't have anymore. What I feel toward her is more like pity, maybe. Pity for someone so broken that they can't see reality, can't understand that what they call love is actually violence, possession, destruction. But pity doesn't make her less dangerous. If anything, it makes it worse, because it makes me hesitate, makes me wonder if there was something I could have said or done differently that would have prevented all of this. My therapist says this is common, that victims often blame themselves, look for ways they could have changed the outcome. But the truth is, there was nothing I could have done. Sarah was sick long before she met me. I was just the unlucky one who caught her attention. Sometimes I have nightmares about her. In them, she's always smiling that terrible smile, always saying she loves me while doing horrible things. In the worst ones, she doesn't hurt me directly. She hurts the people I love, my family, my girlfriend, and makes me watch, tells me it's my fault for running, for rejecting her, for not understanding that we belong together. I wake up from these nightmares gasping, soaked in sweat, and have to check every lock, every window, sometimes even driving by my parents' new house just to make sure everything is okay. My girlfriend has learned to recognize the signs of these bad nights, knows to give me space to do my checking rituals without judgment. She's incredible, actually, my girlfriend. Her name is... well, I can't tell you her real name. Let's call her Emma. She knew about my situation before we got together. A mutual friend had given her the basic outline, and she chose to pursue a relationship with me anyway. She says everyone has baggage. Mine is just more unusual than most. But I see the strain it puts on her sometimes. The way she has to think twice before posting anything online. The way she has to lie to her friends about why they can't come to our house, why we can't go to certain public events. She says it's worth it, that she loves me. But I wonder how long someone can live like this before it becomes too much. We've talked about the future, carefully, tentatively, about marriage, about children. But how can I bring children into this situation? How can I risk Sarah finding out about them, using them to get to me? The thought of her near any child of mine makes me physically ill. So we table the discussion, push it off to some mythical future time when things are better, both of us knowing that time might never come. The private investigator I hired last year couldn't find her. She had disappeared completely after her release. No credit cards, no phone contracts, no address. She could be dead for all I know, though I doubt I'm that lucky. More likely, she learned from me, learned how to disappear, how to live off the grid. The thought that I might have taught her how to be a better stalker is another weight on my conscience. I've considered reaching out to her parents, seeing if they know anything, but my therapist advised against it. Any contact with anyone from that part of my life could potentially lead her back to me. So I remain in limbo, unable to move forward, unable to go back, stuck in this half-life of constant vigilance and muted fear. The worst part is how normal everything seems most of the time. Days go by, weeks even, when nothing happens, where I can almost forget. I go to work, come home, have dinner with Emma, watch television, live a life that from the outside looks completely ordinary. But underneath, always, is the knowledge that this peace is provisional, possibly temporary. I've become an expert at spotting surveillance, at noticing when the same car appears too often, when someone seems too interested in what I'm doing. Most of the time, it's nothing, just my paranoia creating patterns where none exist. But I can't afford to ignore my instincts. The one time I dismiss something as paranoia could be the time it's actually her. Friends from my old life sometimes try to reach out through the few family members who know how to contact me. They want to know why I disappeared, why I changed. I can't tell them the truth, so they're left thinking I abandoned them, that our friendship meant nothing. Another casualty of Sarah's obsession. I've thought about writing a book about this experience, sharing my story with others who might be going through something similar. But even that feels dangerous. What if she reads it? What if she recognizes details, uses them to find me? So the story stays locked inside me, shared only with therapists and the occasional support group, always under false names, always with details changed to protect my identity. The legal system, for all its attempts to help, feels woefully inadequate for dealing with someone like Sarah. Restraining orders are just paper. Jail time is temporary. There's no cure for the kind of obsession she has, no treatment that can guarantee she won't come back. The system is designed for people who fear consequences, who can be deterred. Sarah is neither of those things. I've educated myself about erotomania, the delusional belief that someone is in love with you despite clear evidence to the contrary. It's what Sarah has, according to the psychiatrist who evaluated her. It's rare, difficult to treat, and often chronic. The object of fixation rarely changes, which means I could be dealing with this for the rest of my life, or hers, whichever ends first. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I think about that ending, not actively planning anything, just wondering, if she were gone, really gone, would I finally be free? Could I use my real name again, live in one place for more than a few years, let my family return to their old lives? The thought makes me feel guilty, monstrous even, but I can't help it. When someone takes so much from you, it's natural to wish they would just stop existing. But I'm not a violent person. I couldn't hurt anyone, not even her, not even in self-defense probably, which might be my fatal flaw in this situation. She has no such restrictions, no moral boundaries that would stop her from doing whatever she thinks is necessary to possess me. It's an uneven playing field, and I'm always going to be at a disadvantage. The support group I attend online has people who have been dealing with stalkers for decades. One woman has been stalked for 23 years. 23 years of moving, hiding, looking over her shoulder. She says you learn to live with it, like chronic pain. It becomes part of your life, something you manage rather than cure. The thought is both comforting and terrifying. There's a man in the group whose stalker finally stopped after 15 years. Not because they got help or found someone else, but because they died in a car accident. He says he didn't feel relief when he found out, just empty, like a part of his identity had been removed. He'd been the stalked for so long, he didn't know how to be anything else. It took him years of therapy to learn how to live without fear. I wonder sometimes what Sarah's life is like now. Does she work? Have friends? Has she found someone else to fixate on? Or is she out there, somewhere, living her life entirely around the goal of finding me again? The thought that I might occupy as much space in her mind as she does in mine is somehow both satisfying and horrifying. My family has adapted better than I expected to our new life. My siblings, now older, understand better why we had to leave. They don't blame me, or at least they say they don't. But I see the way they're more careful than their peers, less trusting, more aware of their surroundings. I've infected them with my hypervigilance, taught them that the world contains dangers they never should have had to think about. My mother has become something of an expert on stalking and harassment law, researching obsessively, always looking for new legal avenues we might pursue if Sarah reappears. My father has taken up martial arts, says it's for fitness, but I know it's because he feels helpless, needs to feel like he could protect his family if necessary. We don't talk about it much, but it's always there, the elephant in every room, the shadow over every family gathering. We can't plan too far in the future because we might have to run again. We can't get too attached to our new community because we might have to leave it. We exist in a permanent state of impermanence. The financial cost has been enormous too. The moves, the legal fees, the security systems, the therapy for all of us. I've estimated that Sarah's obsession has cost my family over $200,000 so far. Money that could have gone to my siblings' college funds, my parents' retirement. Another thing to feel guilty about. But the emotional cost is immeasurable. The relationships that couldn't survive the strain, the opportunities we've had to pass up because they were too risky, the simple joy of living without fear that we'll never get back. She stole our peace of mind, and that's something you can't put a price on. I still work as a plumber, but I'll never love it the way I used to. Every job is fraught with anxiety, every new site a potential danger. I've become the weird guy who won't engage in small talk, who keeps his head down and leaves as soon as the work is done. My co-workers think I'm antisocial, maybe even rude. If only they knew I was trying to protect them too. Because that's another fear, that Sarah might hurt someone else to get to me. A co-worker who was too friendly, a neighbor who knew too much, anyone who might be seen as standing between us in her deluded mind. I keep everyone at arm's length, not just for my safety but for theirs. The irony is that in trying to escape Sarah's control, I've let her control everything about my life. Where I live, what I'm called, who I associate with, how I move through the world. She's not physically present, but she might as well be. Her ghost haunts every decision I make. I've tried to find meaning in this experience, some lesson or purpose that makes it all worthwhile. People say everything happens for a reason, but I can't find the reason in this. It's just senseless, a random collision between a broken person and an unlucky one. There's no deeper meaning, no silver lining, just damage and fear and a life lived in the shadows. But I keep going. I wake up every morning, go to work, come home to Emma, try to build something resembling a normal life. Because what's the alternative? Giving up would mean Sarah wins, and despite everything, I'm too stubborn for that. Or maybe too scared of what giving up would actually mean. The story doesn't have an ending, not really. It just goes on, day after day, year after year, until one of us is gone. Maybe she'll find me again, and this whole cycle will restart. Maybe she won't, and I'll spend the rest of my life running from a ghost. Either way, I'm trapped in a story I never wanted to be part of, playing a role I never auditioned for. So if you're reading this, if you've made it this far through my rambling paranoid narrative, let me leave you with this. Be careful who you smile at, who you're polite to, whose pipes you fix. Because sometimes, that's all it takes. A moment of professional courtesy, a simple human interaction, and suddenly your whole life belongs to someone else. I still check the locks every night. I still scan every crowd for her face. I still jump when the phone rings. And somewhere out there, I believe with every fiber of my being, Sarah is still looking for me, still believing we're meant to be together, still planning the moment when she'll make me understand that I belong to her. The only question is whether she'll find me before one of us runs out of time. And honestly, I don't know which outcome terrifies me more. The night shift visitor. My name is Rebecca, and I need to tell you about something that happened to me 2 years ago, something that fundamentally changed how I view the world and the people in it. I was 28 at the time, working as a night shift manager at the Grandview Hotel, one of those mid-tier establishments that catered to business travelers and families on road trips. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well enough, and I actually enjoyed the quiet hours when the world seemed to sleep and I could catch up on my reading or listen to podcasts while manning the front desk. The Grandview was located just off Interstate 85, surrounded by nothing but pine forests and the occasional gas station. During the day, it was unremarkable, just another corporate hotel with its beige walls and generic artwork. But at night, when the fog rolled in from the nearby lake and the parking lot lights created pools of yellow in the darkness, it took on a different character entirely. Sometimes, sitting alone at that desk at 3 a.m, I felt like I was manning an outpost at the edge of the world. I had been working there for about 6 months when it happened. It was a Tuesday night in February, one of those bitter cold evenings when the wind seemed to cut right through you. We were mostly empty, just a handful of guests scattered across our 60 rooms. The evening shift clerk, Marcus, had left at 11, and I had settled in for what I expected to be another quiet night of Netflix and occasional paperwork. The first sign that something was wrong came around midnight. I was updating the next day's checkout list when I heard the automatic doors at the entrance start their mechanical sliding, opening and closing repeatedly. This wasn't unusual in itself, as the sensors could be triggered by anything from a large moth to a piece of trash blown by the wind. But tonight, the rhythm was different, deliberate somehow, as if someone was standing just at the edge of the sensor's range, triggering it purposefully. I looked up from my computer screen, peering through the lobby toward the glass doors. The parking lot beyond was dimly lit, and I could see nothing but the few cars belonging to our guests and my own sedan parked in the employee section. The doors continued their mechanical dance for another minute before finally falling still. I tried to return to my work, but a nagging sense of unease had settled in my chest. You develop instincts working night shifts, a sort of sixth sense for when something is off. The lobby suddenly felt too large, too exposed, with its high ceilings and walls of windows. I found myself straining to hear any sound beyond the music playing softly from the speakers and the hum of the coffee machine that was perpetually brewing in the breakfast area. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the floor above me. This shouldn't have been concerning, as we had guests on the second floor, but something about the walking pattern made me pause. It was too regular, too measured, like someone pacing the exact same path over and over. I pulled up our registration system to check which rooms were occupied on that floor. We had guests in 201, 205, and 218. The footsteps seemed to be coming from directly above the lobby, which would put them in the hallway, not in any room. I decided to check the security cameras. The Grandview had a basic system, nothing fancy, just cameras at the entrances, elevators, and at either end of each hallway. I clicked through to the second floor feeds and found myself looking at empty corridors. No one was walking there, yet I could still hear the footsteps, steady and rhythmic, right above my head. My hands were starting to sweat as I cycled through all the camera feeds. Everything appeared normal, just empty hallways bathed in that artificial fluorescent light that made everything look slightly green. But the footsteps continued, and now they seemed to be moving, heading toward the elevator. I watched the elevator camera intently, waiting to see whoever was making those sounds. The footsteps stopped right at the elevator doors, and I held my breath, waiting. But the elevator didn't move. The doors didn't open. After a moment of silence, the footsteps resumed, heading back the way they had come. This went on for another hour. The pacing, the approach to the elevator, the pause, the return. Always the same pattern, always the same measured pace. I was beginning to think I was losing my mind when the phone rang, startling me so badly I knocked over my coffee mug, sending lukewarm coffee spreading across the desk. It was room 205, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who was traveling to visit her grandchildren. Her voice was shaky when she spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you, dear, but there's someone walking up and down the hallway, and it's keeping me awake. Could you please ask them to return to their room?" My mouth went dry. So I wasn't imagining it. Someone was up there, but somehow staying out of view of the cameras. "Of course, Mrs. Chen. I'll take care of it right away." I hung up and stared at the monitors again. Still nothing. The hallway was empty, but I could hear the footsteps continuing their endless circuit. I had two choices: call the police and try to explain that we had an invisible person walking our hallways, or go up there myself and investigate. Looking back, I should have called the police. But at the time, I was worried about looking foolish, about causing a scene over what might turn out to be a building settling or pipes expanding. So I grabbed the master key card and the heavy flashlight we kept behind the desk, more for comfort than any real protection it might offer, and headed for the elevator. The ride to the second floor felt eternal. As the elevator rose, the footsteps above grew louder, more distinct. They had a strange quality to them, a heaviness that suggested someone much larger than average, yet also a weird shuffling sound, as if the person was dragging something with each step. When the elevator doors opened, I found myself facing an empty hallway that stretched in both directions. The carpet was that typical hotel pattern designed to hide stains, swirls of burgundy and gold that seemed to writhe in the fluorescent light. The footsteps had stopped the moment the elevator dinged, and now the silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the ice machine at the far end of the hall. I stepped out slowly, gripping the flashlight tightly even though the overhead lights were working fine. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. "This is hotel management. If someone is out here, please return to your room." Nothing. No response, no movement, no sound except my own breathing and the distant hum of machinery. I walked slowly down the hallway, checking each alcove, each doorway, finding nothing. The smell hit me when I reached the middle of the hallway, right above where the front desk would be. It was subtle at first, just a whiff of something wrong, something organic and unpleasant. As I stood there trying to identify it, it grew stronger, the unmistakable smell of decay, of something that had been dead for days. I covered my nose with my shirt sleeve and looked around frantically for the source. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The smell was so strong now that my eyes were watering, and I could taste it in the back of my throat, thick and cloying. Then I heard it, a sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was breathing, slow and labored, coming from right behind me. I spun around, raising the flashlight like a club, but there was nothing there. Just empty hallway. But the breathing continued, and now I could feel it, hot and moist on the back of my neck. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, slamming my hand on the elevator button repeatedly until the doors opened. As they closed behind me, I caught a glimpse of something in the polished metal surface, a reflection of something that shouldn't have been there, a shape, tall and wrong, standing exactly where I had been moments before. When I reached the lobby, I immediately called the police, abandoning any concern about looking foolish. While I waited for them to arrive, I watched the monitors obsessively. The second-floor hallway remained empty on screen, but I could see the carpet depressing in regular intervals, as if invisible feet were walking across it. The footsteps had resumed their pacing. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. Officers Martinez and Kowalski, both looking skeptical but professional. I explained what had happened, showed them the monitors, pointed out the depression in the carpet that was still visible on the feed. Martinez went up to investigate while Kowalski stayed with me. We watched Martinez on the monitor as he walked the hallway. He stopped in the same spot where I had smelled the decay, and even through the grainy camera feed, I could see his expression change. He said something into his radio that we couldn't hear clearly, then continued his search. After a few minutes, he returned to the elevator, and when he emerged in the lobby, his face was pale. "We need to check the hotel records," he said. "Has anyone died in this hotel recently?" My blood ran cold. We'd had no deaths during my tenure, but I pulled up the records anyway, going back years. What I found made my hands shake. 3 years ago, almost to the day, a man named William Trent had died in room 211, which was right above the front desk. He had been there for a business trip, and when he didn't check out on time, housekeeping had found him. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, but the body had been there for 3 days before discovery. The room had been renovated and renumbered after that, becoming a supply closet. Martinez and Kowalski exchanged glances. "We're going to need to check that closet," Martinez said. I gave them the key, and we all went up together. I stayed back as they opened what was now the supply closet. The smell that wafted out was overwhelming, that same decay scent but concentrated, as if it had been trapped in there for years. But the closet itself was normal, just shelves of towels and cleaning supplies. Kowalski was about to close the door when Martinez stopped him, pointing at something on the floor. There, in the dust that had accumulated in the corner, were footprints. Fresh footprints, in dust that should have been undisturbed for months. They called for backup, and soon the hotel was swarming with police and eventually a detective. They questioned all the guests, searched every room, even brought in dogs. They found nothing conclusive, no explanation for the footprints, the smell, or what I had experienced. But the investigation did uncover something disturbing about William Trent. He hadn't been the businessman he claimed to be. Police found evidence that he had been stalking a woman who worked at a company nearby, that he had come to town specifically to find her. His laptop, which had been returned to his family after his death, contained hundreds of photos of this woman, taken without her knowledge, plans to kidnap her, detailed fantasies about what he would do. The woman, Sarah Hendricks, had moved away shortly after Trent's death, never knowing how close she had come to danger. She had been staying in our hotel the night I experienced the haunting, in town for a friend's wedding. She had checked out early that morning, hours before I started my shift, complaining about a strange smell in her room and feeling like someone was watching her. The police couldn't explain the supernatural elements of what happened, but they documented everything thoroughly. The hotel management, terrified of publicity, offered me a substantial sum to sign a non-disclosure agreement and quietly leave my position. I took it. I needed the money, and more importantly, I needed to never set foot in that hotel again. But the story doesn't end there, because William Trent, or whatever was left of him, wasn't confined to the hotel. About a month after I left the Grandview, I was settling into my new apartment in a city 200 miles away, trying to put the whole experience behind me. I had found a day job at a call center, nothing exciting but blessedly normal. I was beginning to sleep through the night again, the nightmares becoming less frequent. Then the footsteps started again. It was subtle at first. I lived on the second floor of a converted Victorian house, and old buildings make noise. I told myself it was just the house settling, or my downstairs neighbor moving around. But the pattern was familiar, that same measured pacing, that same shuffling drag with each step. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself I was being paranoid, that the trauma from the hotel was making me imagine things. But then my neighbor from downstairs knocked on my door one evening, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson who had lived in the building for 20 years. "I don't mean to bother you, dear," he said, his voice concerned, "but you've been pacing a lot lately, especially at night. The ceiling is pretty thin, and I can hear every step. Is everything all right?" I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Mr. Peterson, I haven't been pacing. I've been hearing footsteps too, but I thought they were coming from above me." His face paled. "But you're on the top floor. There's nothing above you but the attic, and that's been sealed for years." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with every light on, listening to the footsteps circle above me. They were louder now, more insistent, as if whatever was making them knew I was listening. Around 3 in the morning, the exact time when I had first encountered them at the hotel, they stopped directly above where I was sitting. Then, slowly, I heard them descending. Not downstairs, because there were no stairs from the attic to my apartment. Through the ceiling, as if whatever was walking could move through solid matter. The sound grew closer and closer until it seemed to be right above my head, separated by only a few inches of plaster and wood. A drop of something wet hit my forehead. I touched it, and my finger came away red. Blood was seeping through the ceiling, just a few drops at first, then a steady drip. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but before I could dial, the dripping stopped. The footsteps retreated, moving back up through the ceiling, resuming their pacing in the attic. I left that night with just the clothes on my back and never returned. The landlord called me several times, threatening legal action for breaking the lease, but I didn't care. I stayed with a friend while I researched everything I could about William Trent, about hauntings, about anything that might explain what was happening to me. What I found chilled me more than any ghostly encounter. William Trent had a history that went far beyond stalking Sarah Hendricks. There were other women, in other cities, spanning years. Women who reported feeling watched, followed, haunted by something they couldn't see. 3 of them had died under mysterious circumstances, officially ruled as accidents or suicides, but all occurring after they had complained to friends and family about feeling stalked by something invisible. I reached out to Sarah Hendricks through social media, using a fake account because I didn't want to frighten her with my real name and its connection to the hotel. She was reluctant to talk at first, but when I mentioned the Grandview Hotel and William Trent, she agreed to a phone call. Her story was terrifying. Even after Trent's death, she had felt his presence. Objects in her home would move when she wasn't looking. She would wake up to find her windows open, her doors unlocked. Pictures of herself that she had never taken would appear on her phone. The final straw had been waking up one night to find an indentation on the bed beside her, as if someone invisible was lying there. She had moved across the country, changed her name, started a new life, but she admitted to me that she still felt watched sometimes, still heard footsteps following her on empty streets, still found things moved in her home. She had learned to live with it, she said, like living with a chronic illness. You couldn't cure it, only manage it. Why does he fixate on certain people? I asked her. You were his primary target, but now he seems to be following me. There was a long pause before she answered. I think it's because you saw him, really saw him, or almost did. Most people can't, or won't let themselves. But once you've seen him, once you've acknowledged he exists, he knows you're aware, and he can't let that go. She gave me advice on how to protect myself. Salt lines at doors and windows, though she admitted they only worked temporarily. Keeping lights on helped, as did noise, especially recordings of multiple people talking. He seemed to be weaker when there were witnesses, she said, less able to manifest physically. But the most important thing, she told me, was to never be alone in the dark. That's when he was strongest, when the barrier between whatever realm he existed in and ours was thinnest. As long as I stayed in populated, well-lit areas, I would probably be safe. Probably. I took her advice, moving into a studio apartment in a busy part of downtown, on a floor with multiple other units. I kept lights on constantly, played the television 24 hours a day, joined a 24-hour gym just to have somewhere to go if I felt unsafe. For a while, it worked. The footsteps faded to occasional whispers of sound. The sense of being watched diminished to a manageable level of paranoia. But William Trent, or the thing that had been William Trent, was patient. He had eternity, after all. I had only a human lifetime of vigilance, and humans make mistakes. It happened 6 months later. I had grown complacent, comfortable in my new routine. I had even started dating someone, a kind man named David who didn't mind my quirks about keeping lights on and my need to sleep with the television playing. He thought it was endearing, a sign of my sensitive nature. One night, David convinced me to go camping with him. Just one night, he said, in a popular campground with lots of other people around. It would be good for me to face my fears, to prove to myself that I could be okay in the dark. I agreed, against every instinct screaming at me not to. The campground was beautiful, nestled in the mountains with a clear view of the stars. We set up our tent between 2 other families, close enough that I could hear their conversations, their children playing. As the sun set, I felt my anxiety rising, but David held my hand, told me everything would be okay. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, told stories. For a few hours, I almost forgot about William Trent, almost convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing, that it had been stress and trauma creating hallucinations. David and I crawled into our tent around midnight, and I fell asleep to the sound of his breathing and the crackling of dying fires around us. I woke at 3 in the morning to absolute silence. Not normal nighttime quiet, but a complete absence of sound. No insects, no wind, no breathing from David beside me. I reached out and found his sleeping bag empty and cold. My phone was dead despite being fully charged when I went to sleep. The flashlight wouldn't turn on. And then I heard them. The footsteps circling our tent, that same measured pace, that same shuffling drag. But this time, there was something else. Whispers, just at the edge of hearing, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from a throat full of grave dirt. "You can't hide from me," the voice said. "I've been waiting. So patient. So hungry." The tent zipper began to move, slowly, tooth by tooth. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. I was paralyzed, could only watch as the zipper descended and the tent flap began to open. What I saw in that opening still haunts my dreams. It wasn't quite a face, more like the memory of a face, features that shifted and writhed as if they couldn't quite remember how to be human, eyes that were just dark holes, a mouth that opened too wide, skin that looked like it was made of shadow and decay. "You saw me," it whispered. "You acknowledged me. Now you're mine, just like all the others." A hand, or something shaped like a hand, reached through the opening toward me. It was solid and not solid at the same time, real and unreal, dead and somehow terribly alive. As it touched my ankle, cold shot through me like I'd been plunged into Arctic water. I could feel my life being drawn out, my warmth, my very essence being pulled into that horrible void. But then David's voice cut through the darkness, calling my name. Light flooded the tent as he turned on a lantern, and the thing that had been William Trent recoiled, dissolving like smoke. David had only gone to the bathroom, had only been gone for a few minutes, but in that dark space, Trent had found his opportunity. I told David everything that night, expecting him to think I was insane. But he believed me, had felt the wrongness in the air when he returned, had seen something dissipating in the light of his lantern. We packed up immediately and left, driving through the night back to the city. David researched obsessively after that, delving into paranormal investigations, old legends, anything that might help us understand what William Trent had become. He found stories going back centuries of similar entities, people whose obsessions were so strong that death couldn't stop them, who became something between ghost and demon, feeding on fear and isolation. The only permanent solution, according to the law, was to find and destroy the anchor that kept them tethered to this world. In Trent's case, it would be something connected to his obsession, something he valued above all else. But what? And where? It took months of investigation, but eventually David found it. In the basement of Trent's childhood home, now owned by strangers who had no idea of its history, was a collection. Hundreds of items stolen from women over the years. Jewelry, clothing, photographs, locks of hair. Trophies of his obsession, carefully preserved and catalogued. The new owners, horrified by what we told them and showed them, allowed us to remove everything. We burned it all in a ceremony that felt both ridiculous and necessary, saying prayers from every religion we could think of, salting the earth where the ashes fell. For a few days, nothing changed. I still heard the footsteps, still felt the watching presence. But then, gradually, it began to fade. Like a radio signal getting weaker, the manifestations became less frequent, less intense. The footsteps became echoes, then whispers, then nothing at all. It's been a year now since we burned Trent's collection. I still sleep with lights on, still jump at unexpected sounds, still feel my heart race when I'm alone in the dark. But the presence is gone, truly gone. Sarah Hendricks confirmed it too, said she felt free for the first time in years. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder about all the other William Trents out there. The obsessed, the predatory, the ones whose darkness is so deep that even death can't contain it. I wonder how many people are out there right now, hearing footsteps that shouldn't exist, seeing shadows that don't match anything in the room, feeling watched by eyes that no longer have a body. And I wonder if destroying the anchor really ended William Trent, or if it just sent him somewhere else, to some other realm where he waits, patient and eternal, for another way back. Because the truth I learned from all of this is that some hungers are too strong for death to stop. Some obsessions burn so bright they leave a mark on reality itself. And sometimes, the monsters that haunt us aren't metaphorical at all. They're real, they're waiting, and they're very, very patient. I work in IT now, surrounded by people during the day, living with David, who understands why I need the lights on. We don't talk about William Trent anymore, but he's always there, a shadow in our past, a reminder that the world is stranger and more dangerous than most people ever realize. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I'm walking down an empty hallway at work, or when I'm the last one in the office as evening falls, I swear I can hear them again, just for a moment, just at the edge of perception. Those footsteps, that measured pace, that shuffling drag. But when I turn to look, there's never anything there. At least, nothing I can see. The house on Millwood Street. My name is Marcus, and I'm going to tell you about the worst mistake of my life. A decision that seemed so innocent at the time, but led to months of terror that I'm still recovering from. It started 3 years ago when I was 25, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in architecture, and desperately looking for affordable housing in Seattle, while starting my first real job at a small firm downtown. Anyone who's looked for housing in Seattle knows the nightmare of trying to find something that doesn't cost your entire salary. I had been sleeping on a friend's couch for 2 months, scrolling through listings every night, viewing overpriced studios and moldy basements, getting more desperate with each passing day. My friend, Jake, was patient, but I could tell my presence was wearing on him and his girlfriend. I needed to find something fast. That's when I found the listing for the room on Millwood Street. It was almost too good to be true. A large bedroom with a private bathroom in a beautiful Victorian house, fully furnished, utilities included, and the rent was about half what I'd expect to pay for something similar. The photos showed hardwood floors, tall windows with original molding, and vintage furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. The listing was sparse on details, posted by someone named Eleanor Vance, who described herself as the live-in landlord. She mentioned she was an elderly woman looking for a quiet, responsible tenant to occupy the 3rd floor of her home. There were a few rules listed: no overnight guests, no loud music after 9 p.m., and no cooking in the room, though kitchen privileges were included. These seemed reasonable enough for the price. I immediately sent an email expressing my interest, expecting to be one of hundreds of applicants. To my surprise, Eleanor responded within an hour, inviting me to view the room that very evening. Her email was formal, old-fashioned in its language, but warm. She said she had a good feeling about me from my message. The house was in an older part of Seattle, a neighborhood that had somehow escaped the modern development that had transformed most of the city. The streets were lined with massive trees that formed a canopy overhead, and the houses were all from the early 1900s, each one unique and meticulously maintained. Number 47 Millwood Street stood at the end of the block, set back from the road behind an iron fence covered in ivy. It was exactly the kind of house I had studied in school, a Queen and Victorian with a complex roofline, decorative shingles, and a wraparound porch with intricate spindle work. The paint was fresh, a sophisticated combination of deep blue with cream and burgundy trim. As I walked up the stone path, I noticed that despite it being late September, the garden was still in full bloom, with roses that seemed impossibly vibrant in the fading light. Eleanor answered the door before I could knock. She was not what I expected. From her email, I had pictured a frail, grandmotherly type. Instead, Eleanor was tall and straight-backed, dressed in clothes that seemed to belong to another era but worn with such confidence they seemed fashionable rather than outdated. Her hair was silver, pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her eyes were a striking violet color I'd never seen before. "You must be Marcus," she said, her voice cultured and precise. "Please, come in. I've been expecting you." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. The entrance hall featured a grand staircase with carved banisters, original stained glass windows that cast colored shadows on the walls, and what appeared to be genuine Tiffany light fixtures. Everything was immaculate, not a speck of dust anywhere, and the air smelled of lavender and old wood. "This house has been in my family for 4 generations," Eleanor explained as she led me up the stairs. "Built in 1902 by my great-grandfather. I'm afraid I'm the last of the line, no children to pass it on to, but I do my best to maintain it as it deserves." We passed the second floor, where Eleanor mentioned her own rooms were located, and continued up a narrower staircase to the 3rd floor. The change was subtle but noticeable. While still beautiful, there was something different about this level, a heaviness in the air that I attributed to being in an attic space. The room she showed me was magnificent. It was actually a suite of 3 rooms, a large bedroom with a bay window overlooking the garden, a smaller sitting room with built-in bookshelves, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and original hexagonal tile. The furniture was all antique, heavy wooden pieces that looked like they'd been there since the house was built. "The previous tenant left rather suddenly," Eleanor said, a shadow passing over her face. "A family emergency, I believe. Such a shame. He was a lovely young man, very quiet, very respectful. Much like yourself, I imagine. I should have asked more about the previous tenant. I should have wondered why such a perfect room at such a low price wasn't already rented. But I was enchanted by the space, by the house, even by Eleanor herself, who had an old-world charm that made me want to impress her. "I'll take it," I said, perhaps too eagerly. Eleanor smiled, and for just a moment I thought I saw something else in her expression, something that might have been relief or even hunger. But it passed so quickly I dismissed it as imagination. "Wonderful," she said. "There are just a few house rules we need to discuss." She led me back down to the 2nd floor, to a small study that served as her office. The walls were covered in old photographs, dating back decades. Formal portraits, family gatherings, all featuring elegantly dressed people with serious expressions. As she prepared the rental agreement, I studied these photos, noting the family resemblance across generations. They all had those same striking eyes. "The rules are quite simple," Eleanor began, handing me a handwritten list. "No overnight guests, as I mentioned. I'm a light sleeper, and extra footsteps disturb me. No loud music or television after 9 o'clock. The kitchen is available to you from 6 to 8 in the morning and 6 to 8 in the evening. Please don't rearrange the furniture in your rooms. Everything is positioned precisely as it should be." She paused, then added, "And please don't go into the basement. It's not safe down there. Old foundation, structural issues. I keep it locked for everyone's safety." The rules seemed eccentric but manageable. I signed the lease that night, gave her the first month's rent and deposit in cash as she requested, and moved in the following day. The first week was perfect. The room was comfortable, the house was quiet, and Eleanor was the ideal landlord, invisible but responsive. I would occasionally hear her moving around on the floor below, the soft sound of classical music drifting up through the vents, but she never intruded on my space. I settled into a routine, work during the day, dinner in the beautiful kitchen while Eleanor retreated to her rooms, then evenings in my suite, reading or working on personal projects. It was during the second week that I began to notice odd things. Small at first, barely worth mentioning. Items in my room would be slightly moved when I came home. Not obviously displaced, just a book at a different angle. A chair pulled out an inch from where I'd left it. I assumed Eleanor was entering to clean, though she hadn't mentioned any cleaning service in our agreement. Then there were the sounds at night. The house was old, I told myself. Old houses make noise. But these weren't random creaks and settling sounds. They were deliberate. Footsteps pacing the hallway outside my door. Doorknobs turning slowly. Whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls. Several times I got up to investigate, but the hallway was always empty, and Eleanor's door on the floor below remained firmly closed. The third week brought visual disturbances. Shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Figures that disappeared when I turned to look directly at them. Once, I was certain I saw someone standing in the sitting room as I passed by, but when I entered, it was empty. Another time, I woke in the middle of the night to see a silhouette at my bay window, backlit by the street lamp. When I turned on the light, nothing was there, but the window was open, cold air streaming in, though I was certain I had locked it before bed. I tried to talk to Eleanor about these experiences, catching her one evening in the kitchen. She was making tea, moving with that same graceful precision that characterized everything she did. "Eleanor, I've been experiencing some strange things in my room," I began carefully. "Noises, movements. Is there anyone else who has access to the third floor?" She turned to me slowly, her violet eyes unreadable. "Of course not, dear. Just you and I. Old houses have their quirks, you know. The third floor, in particular, has always been sensitive. You're not frightened, are you?" There was something in the way she said sensitive that made me uncomfortable, and the question about being frightened felt like a test. "No, not frightened. Just curious." "Curiosity," she said, turning back to her tea, "can be dangerous in old houses. Best to leave some things unexplored." That night, the disturbances escalated. I was awakened by the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor above me. But there was no floor above me. I was on the third floor. The sound seemed to come from the attic, which I hadn't even known existed. As I lay there listening, the dragging stopped, replaced by rhythmic thumping, like someone dropping something heavy over and over again. I grabbed my phone to record the sound, thinking I might need evidence if I had to break my lease. But when I played back the recording the next morning, there was only silence. The sounds I had heard so clearly didn't register on the audio at all. I began researching the house's history, spending my lunch breaks at the City Archives and Historical Society. What I found was disturbing. The house had indeed been built by Eleanor's great-grandfather, Theodore Vance, in 1902. But Theodore had disappeared mysteriously in 1915, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. His body was never found. More disturbing were the records of subsequent tenants of the third floor. Over the decades, there had been a pattern of people renting the rooms, staying for a few weeks or months, then leaving suddenly. Some disappeared entirely, others were found days later, wandering the streets in a state of confusion, unable to explain where they'd been or what had happened to them. The most recent case I could find was from 5 years ago, a young teacher named James Whitmore who had rented the room for 6 weeks before his roommate reported him missing. He was found 3 days later in Discovery Park, nearly catatonic, and had to be hospitalized for severe dehydration and exhaustion. When he recovered enough to speak, he claimed he had been somewhere else, but couldn't explain where. He left Seattle immediately after being discharged and never returned. I also found an old newspaper article from 1952 about a fire on the third floor that had killed a tenant named Margaret Sullivan. The strange thing was, the fire had been confined entirely to one room, burning so hot it reduced everything to ash, yet hadn't spread to the rest of the house. The cause was never determined. Armed with this information, I decided to confront Eleanor again. But when I returned home that evening, I found a note slipped under my door in her elegant handwriting. Had to leave town unexpectedly. Family emergency. Will return in 3 days. Please water the plants in the conservatory. E.V. I had never seen a conservatory in the house, but I discovered it attached to the back, accessible through a door in the kitchen I had assumed was a pantry. It was a glass structure filled with plants I didn't recognize, exotic species with leaves that seemed to move without any breeze, flowers that appeared to track my movement as I walked past. The air inside was thick and humid, with an underlying smell that reminded me of copper and soil. That night, alone in the house for the first time, things got much worse. It started with the mirrors. Every mirror in my suite began showing reflections that weren't quite right. My reflection would move a fraction of a second after I did, or I would see myself in the background of the mirror when I was standing directly in front of it. Once, I caught my reflection smiling when I wasn't. Then came the voices. Not whispers anymore, but full conversations happening just beyond my ability to make out the words. They seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, multiple people talking, arguing, sometimes laughing. The laughter was the worst, high and unnatural, like it was being played backward. I tried to leave, to go stay with Jake again until Eleanor returned, but when I tried to open my door, it wouldn't budge. Not locked, exactly, but resistant, as if the wood had swollen to fill the frame perfectly. The windows were the same, sealed shut despite the latches being open. My phone had no signal, and the landline I had seen in Eleanor's study was nowhere to be found. I was trapped. That's when I noticed the photographs. The ones I had admired in Eleanor's study had appeared in my room, covering one entire wall. But these weren't the same photos. These showed the third floor, my rooms, but in different time periods. And in each photo, there was a figure that looked like Eleanor, unchanged despite the decades that should have passed. In some photos from what appeared to be the 1920s, she looked exactly as she did now. Same clothes, same hairstyle, same ageless face. But the most terrifying photos were the ones that showed the tenants. Young men, all of them, all bearing a disturbing resemblance to each other. To me, we all had the same build, the same dark hair, the same general features. And in the last photo in each series, the tenant was always shown lying in the bed I now slept in, with Eleanor standing over them, her hand placed on their forehead, her mouth open as if she was inhaling something. I understood then what I had stumbled into. This wasn't just a rental situation. I was prey, carefully selected, lured by the too-good-to-be-true listing, the beautiful room, the charming landlord. Eleanor wasn't what she appeared to be, and the third floor wasn't just a suite of rooms. It was a trap. The house began to change around me. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm like a heartbeat. The floorboards rippled like water. The furniture began to move on its own, rearranging itself into configurations that hurt to look at, angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. I retreated to the bathroom, the smallest space, thinking it would be easier to defend or at least monitor. But the bathtub began filling with a dark liquid that wasn't water, and faces appeared in the surface. Young men's faces, all those previous tenants, their mouths open in silent screams. That's when Eleanor returned, not through the door, but simply appearing in the room as if she had always been there. Only she didn't look like the Eleanor I had met. This version was ancient, her skin like parchment, her violet eyes now black voids, her elegant clothes rotting on her skeletal frame. "You've been exploring," she said, her voice like wind through a cemetery. "I did warn you about curiosity. What are you?" I managed to ask, pressing myself against the wall. She smiled, revealing too many teeth, all sharp. "I am hunger, Marcus. I am the need that never dies. This house is my web, and you, sweet boy, are the fly. Every generation I must feed. Your life force, your youth, your essence. It sustains me, keeps me tethered to this world. The previous tenants fed me well, but it's never enough. A few weeks, a few months of slowly draining them, and then they break. Their minds can't handle the truth of what's happening to them. But you're stronger, aren't you? You'll last longer. I chose well this time. She moved toward me, gliding rather than walking, and as she did, I felt my strength leaving me, my life force being pulled toward her like iron to a magnet. My vision began to darken at the edges, and I knew that if I passed out, I would never wake up again. Or worse, wake up somewhere else like James Whitmore, broken and unable to explain what had happened. In desperation, I grabbed the antique mirror from the wall and smashed it on the ground. The sound of breaking glass was enormous, echoing through the house like thunder. Eleanor recoiled, her form flickering, and for a moment I saw the house as it really was, decaying, rotting, held together by whatever supernatural force Eleanor commanded. The broken mirror had created a gap in whatever spell contained me. The door to my room swung open, and I ran. But the house fought me, the hallway stretching impossibly long, doors appearing and disappearing, stairs leading up when they should lead down. Eleanor's laughter followed me, along with the sound of many footsteps, as if all the previous tenants were chasing me too. I made it to the second floor and remembered the basement. Eleanor had said not to go there, that it was dangerous. But dangerous for whom? If she didn't want me there, maybe that's exactly where I needed to go. The basement door was locked, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I kicked it open and plunged into the darkness below. The stairs were stone, older than the rest of the house, descending far deeper than any basement should. The walls were carved with symbols that hurt to look at, and the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, I found the truth. The basement wasn't a basement at all, but a cavern, natural or carved I couldn't tell, and in the center was a pool of black water, perfectly still, reflecting nothing. Around it were bones, hundreds of them, human bones, arranged in careful patterns. But most importantly, there was a pedestal, and on it a locket. It was the only thing in the entire space that seemed to radiate warmth rather than cold. I grabbed it and opened it. Inside was a photograph of a young Eleanor, truly young, not the ageless thing she had become. And with her was a man, Theodore Vance, her great-grandfather. But the way they stood together, the way they looked at each other, this wasn't a familial relationship. "That's private," Eleanor's voice came from behind me. She had followed me down, but she seemed weaker here, less solid. "You shouldn't touch what isn't yours. He was your lover, not your great-grandfather," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You killed him, didn't you? Used him to become this." Her face contorted with rage and something else, pain. "He promised we would be together forever. I found a way to make it true. But the spell required sacrifice. His sacrifice. And now, I must continue to sacrifice to maintain it. You're not living," I said. "You're just persisting. This isn't life. It's better than death," she snarled, lunging at me. But the locket in my hand grew burning hot, and when she touched me, she screamed and pulled back. The locket was her anchor, I realized, the thing that kept her tied to this world. Like in every ghost story, there was something physical that needed to be destroyed. I ran toward the pool of black water. Eleanor screamed, a sound that shook dust from the ceiling and cracked the stone walls. "No, you don't understand. If you destroy that, the house will collapse. You'll die too." But dying seemed better than whatever she had planned for me. I threw the locket into the pool. The effect was immediate. The black water began to boil, and Eleanor's scream became something inhuman. She aged decades in seconds, her skin sloughing off, her bones crumbling. The house above us groaned and shuddered. Pieces of the ceiling began to fall. I ran for the stairs as the cavern collapsed behind me. The house was tearing itself apart, walls caving in, floors buckling. The photographs in the hallways burst into flames. The mirrors exploded. Everything Eleanor had held together through supernatural will was returning to its natural state of decay. I made it out just as the house collapsed entirely, a century of rot and degradation happening in minutes. The neighbors had already called 911, and I stood there in the street, covered in dust and blood from small cuts, watching as the beautiful Victorian house on Millwood Street became a pile of rubble. The official story was a gas leak explosion. No one questioned why I, the only tenant, had survived. Eleanor's body was never found, which didn't surprise me. I don't think there was anything left of her that could be identified as human remains. But the story doesn't end there. I thought destroying the locket had ended everything, that Eleanor was gone and her victims were free. But a few weeks later, while staying at a hotel and looking for a new place to live, I began having dreams. Dreams of the young men who had been Eleanor's victims over the decades. They would stand at the foot of my bed, silent, watching. They didn't seem threatening, just lost. I researched each of them, finding their names in old records, learning their stories. Most had families who never knew what happened to them, who had spent years wondering why their son or brother had disappeared or returned broken. I felt obligated to give these families some kind of closure, even if I couldn't tell them the truth. So I created a lie, a story about finding old documents in the house before it collapsed, letters and journals that suggested these men had been victims of a carbon monoxide leak that caused hallucinations and memory loss. It wasn't much, but it was something. Some families were grateful, others suspicious, but at least they had an answer, even if it wasn't the real one. But the dreams continued, and I realized the victims weren't just lost. They were trapped, somehow still connected to the site where the house had stood. I would drive by sometimes, and the lot was always cold, even on the hottest days. Nothing would grow there. The city tried to rebuild, but every construction crew reported equipment failures, unexplained accidents, workers refusing to return after experiencing strange events. I knew I had to do something. These men deserved peace, and as the only survivor, it felt like my responsibility to help them find it. I researched every kind of cleansing ritual, every religious and spiritual practice for releasing trapped souls. Most of it felt like nonsense, but I was desperate. Finally, I found an old woman in the International District who claimed to be a spiritual medium. She was skeptical when I first approached her, but when I showed her a photo of the house that I'd taken before it collapsed, her expression changed. "I know this place," she said quietly. "My grandmother told me about it. A hungry house, she called it. A place that feeds on life. You're lucky to have escaped." She agreed to help me, and one night, we returned to the empty lot. She performed a ritual I didn't understand, burning herbs and chanting in a language I didn't recognize. But I felt something change, a lightness in the air, a sense of release. The dreams stopped after that night, and when I drove by the lot a week later, tiny green shoots were pushing through the soil. The experience changed me fundamentally. I couldn't go back to my normal life, couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I quit my architecture job and started studying paranormal phenomena seriously, not as a believer in every ghost story, but as someone who knew that sometimes horrible things existed just beyond the veil of normal reality. I've encountered other cases since then, other houses that aren't quite right, other entities that feed on human life force. None as powerful as Eleanor, thankfully, but they're out there, more than you'd think. They hide in plain sight, in too-good-to-be-true rental listings, in charming bed and breakfasts, in historic homes that have been on the market for years without selling. The signs are always there if you know what to look for. The temperature drops that have nothing to do with drafts. The way certain rooms feel heavy, oppressive. The landlords or owners who seem too eager, too interested in your personal life. The rules that don't quite make sense. The previous tenants who left suddenly without explanation. I try to help when I can, warning people away from dangerous places, helping those who have already been caught escape. It's dangerous work, and I've had close calls. Some entities don't like being exposed, and they have long memories and longer reaches. But I can't stop, because I know what it's like to be trapped, to feel your life being drained away, to realize you're not a tenant but a meal. And I know there are others out there right now, lying in beautiful antique beds in charming old houses, feeling their strength ebb away night by night, not understanding what's happening to them until it's too late. Eleanor may be gone, but there are others like her. They're patient, they're hungry, and they're always looking for their next victim. So if you ever find a rental that seems too good to be true, in a beautiful old house with a charming landlord and just a few simple rules, remember my story. Remember the house on Millwood Street. And run. The hospital's midnight secret. My name is Jennifer, and I used to work the night shift at Riverside General Hospital. Used to, because after what happened 2 years ago, I can't set foot in any hospital without having a panic attack. I was a registered nurse then, 31 years old, dedicated to my job in a way that my friends said bordered on obsession. I loved helping people, loved the adrenaline of the emergency department, even loved the challenge of the night shift when everything seemed more intense, more critical. Riverside General was an old hospital, built in the 1940s and expanded haphazardly over the decades. The result was a maze of corridors that didn't quite connect logically, wings that had been added without much thought to flow, and entire sections that had been closed off and abandoned as newer facilities were built. The basement was particularly confusing, a warren of storage rooms, old equipment graveyards, and maintenance tunnels that even long-time employees avoided unless absolutely necessary. I had been working at Riverside for 5 years when the incidents began. It was October, and we were short-staffed as usual. The night shift in the emergency department consisted of me, another nurse named Carlos, Dr. Patel, who was the attending physician, and a handful of techs and orderlies. It wasn't enough for a busy night, but we made it work. We always made it work. The first strange thing I noticed was the elevator. The old service elevator that connected the emergency department to the morgue in the basement had started running on its own. We would hear it groaning to life at odd hours, the mechanical sound echoing through the walls. When we checked, it was always empty, just sitting there with its doors open like a mouth waiting to swallow someone. Maintenance said it was an electrical problem, something about old wiring and crossed signals. They promised to fix it, but never seemed to get around to it. After a while, we just got used to it, another quirk of working in an old building. We even joked about it, calling it the ghost elevator, not knowing how close to the truth we were. The second sign was the children. We started getting pediatric patients coming in with the same complaint. They couldn't sleep because someone was singing to them. The parents were baffled, insisting there was no one in their homes singing, no TVs or radios left on. The children, ranging from 3 to 8 years old, all described the same thing. A woman's voice, soft and sad, singing a lullaby they didn't recognize. Dr. Patel dismissed it as mass hysteria, maybe something the kids had heard at school or on the internet that had stuck in their heads. But I noticed something he didn't. All these children lived in different parts of the city, went to different schools, had no connection to each other, and they all drew the same picture when asked about the singing. A figure in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, standing in a doorway, face obscured by shadow. The third sign was more personal. I started having dreams about the hospital when I wasn't there. Not normal work stress dreams, but vivid, almost real experiences where I would be walking the halls during my off hours, following the sound of someone crying. In the dreams, the hospital was different, older, with walls painted that institutional green that hadn't been used since the 1960s. The crying would lead me to the basement, to a door I had never seen before, marked with a number, B12. I mentioned the dreams to Carlos one night during a lull in patience. His face went pale, and he pulled me aside to the break room. "You're dreaming about B12?" he asked, his voice low as if he was afraid someone would overhear. "You know about it?" Carlos looked around nervously before answering. "My grandmother worked here in the 50s. She was a nurse too, back when this place was called Riverside Sanitarium. She told me stories about B12. According to Carlos's grandmother, B12 had been a special ward in the basement, unofficially used for patients that the hospital didn't want to acknowledge. The terminally ill with no families, the mentally ill who had been abandoned, children with conditions that medical science couldn't explain. It was where they put people to be forgotten. There was a nurse," Carlos continued, "Margaret Flynn. She was assigned to B12 permanently. Spent years down there, caring for those patients everyone else ignored. She went crazy eventually, they said. Started believing she could heal them with her singing, that her voice had special powers. They found her one morning in 1963, dead in B12, surrounded by the bodies of 14 patients. The official report said carbon monoxide leak, but my grandmother said what? She said Margaret had gathered all her patients together and sung them to death, then sang herself to death too. They sealed B12 after that, bricked it up. It's supposed to be behind the old boiler room, but no one goes looking for it. I should have dismissed it as an urban legend, a ghost story passed down through generations of hospital staff. But the dreams were getting more intense, more real, and I had started hearing the singing when I was awake, just at the edge of perception, a melody that seemed to come from the walls themselves. 2 weeks before Halloween, everything escalated. We had a rush of critical patients come in all at once, a multi-car accident on the highway. All hands were needed, and in the chaos, I was sent to the basement to retrieve emergency supplies from one of the old storage rooms. The basement at night was a different world from the bustling emergency department above. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly, creating shadows that seemed to move on their own. The walls were that exact green from my dreams, layers of paint over decades barely covering it. And it was cold, so much colder than it should have been. I found the storage room and was gathering supplies when I heard it clearly for the first time. The singing. It was coming from deeper in the basement, from the direction of the old boiler room. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to get back upstairs where there were people and light and sanity. But something pulled me forward, the same compulsion from my dreams. The boiler room was massive, filled with pipes and machinery that hadn't been used in years. But behind it, partially hidden by a large water tank, I found what I was looking for, a wall that was different from the others, newer bricks that didn't match the original construction. And in the center, someone had scratched something into the mortar. B12, may they rest. The singing was coming from behind the wall. I reached out to touch the bricks, and the moment my fingers made contact, the world changed. I wasn't in the basement anymore, or rather, I was in a different version of it. The walls were clean, painted that fresh institutional green. The lights were different, older fixtures that cast a warmer light. And the wall wasn't there. Instead, there was a door, heavy wood with a small window. Through it, I could see a ward, beds lined up against the walls, each occupied by a patient. They were all ages, from children to elderly, and they were all looking at something I couldn't see from my angle. The singing was louder now, beautiful and terrible at the same time. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The patients didn't react to my presence, their eyes fixed on the far end of the ward. There, in a rocking chair, sat a woman in a 1950s nurse's uniform. Margaret Flynn, looking exactly as she must have 60 years ago, young and pretty with dark hair pinned under her cap. She was singing, and her voice was indeed beautiful, but there was something wrong with the song itself. Notes that didn't belong in any scale I knew, harmonies that hurt to hear. "You came," she said, stopping her song to look at me. "I knew someone would eventually. The sensitive ones always hear me." "You're dead," I said, the words coming out as barely a whisper. "Death," she said, standing up, "is just another condition to be treated. I learned that here, in B12. My patients taught me. They were dying, all of them, suffering so terribly. Medicine couldn't help them, but I could. My voice could. I could sing them to a place without pain." She moved closer, and I noticed the patients were moving too, sitting up in their beds with jerky, unnatural motions. Their faces were blank, eyes clouded, and I realized with horror that they were dead, had been dead for 60 years, but somehow still animated by whatever power Margaret possessed. "They're my family now," she continued. "We exist between life and death, in a place where suffering ends. And you, my dear, you're going to help me expand my family." She began to sing again, and this time the song was directed at me. I felt it entering my body, not through my ears but through every pore, every cell. It was beautiful and horrifying, promising an end to all pain, all worry, all the exhaustion of being alive. I could feel myself being pulled toward that promise, my consciousness starting to fade. But then my pager went off, the harsh electronic beeping cutting through the song. The spell broke, and I was back in the present-day basement, standing in front of the bricked-up wall. But I wasn't alone. Margaret was there too, translucent but visible, her face twisted with rage. "You can't escape," she hissed. "You've seen B12. You're marked now. Every time you close your eyes, every moment of silence, you'll hear my song. And eventually, you'll come back. They always come back." I ran. I sprinted through the basement, up the stairs, into the bright lights and chaos of the emergency department. Carlos took one look at my face and pulled me into the break room. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked. "B12. I nodded, unable to speak. He handed me a glass of water and sat with me until I could breathe normally again. I told him everything, and to his credit, he believed me. "We need to tell someone," I said. "Tell them what? That there's a ghost nurse in the basement recruiting dead patients? They'll think you're having a breakdown." He was right, but I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. Over the next few days, I researched everything I could about Margaret Flynn and B12. What I found was worse than the ghost story. Margaret Flynn had been real, and she had indeed worked in B12. But the ward wasn't just for forgotten patients. It had been part of a government experiment, something to do with sound frequency and its effects on human consciousness. Margaret had been both a nurse and a test subject, exposed to specific frequencies that were supposed to enhance healing, but instead had driven her insane. The 14 patients who died with her hadn't been random victims. They had been specifically chosen, all having certain genetic markers that made them susceptible to sonic manipulation. The experiment had been trying to create what documents referred to as transitional beings, humans who could exist between life and death, who could be controlled through sound. It had worked, just not in the way they intended. I found records of similar experiments at other hospitals across the country in the 1950s and 60s, all shut down after incidents. But Riverside's had been the worst, the most successful in its horrific way. Margaret had achieved what the experimenters wanted, had become something between living and dead, and had taken her patients with her. And now she wanted more. The children who had been coming in, complaining of singing, I cross-referenced their medical records with genetic databases. They all had the markers. Margaret was searching for new subjects, calling to them in their sleep. I tried to warn the hospital administration, but without proof. They thought I was having a mental breakdown from stress. They gave me mandatory leave, suggested I see a therapist. But the dreams got worse, and the singing was constant now, a background noise to my entire life. Carlos believed me, though, and he helped me research. We found that there had been other nurses over the years who had reported similar experiences, who had claimed to hear singing in the basement. Most had quit or been transferred. A few had disappeared entirely, and now I suspected I knew where they had gone. We also discovered that the hospital was planning to renovate the basement, to tear down the old boiler room and expand the morgue. They would find B-12, break open that wall, and release whatever was contained there fully into the world. I couldn't let that happen. Carlos and I went back to the basement on Halloween night, when the hospital was at its busiest and no one would notice our absence. We brought salt, iron filings, religious symbols from every faith we could think of, every bit of supernatural protection folklore suggested. We also brought something else, a frequency generator Carlos had borrowed from his cousin who worked in audio engineering. The theory was simple. If Margaret used sound to control her victims, maybe the right frequency could disrupt her power, could break whatever hold she had on those poor souls in B-12. We found the wall easily this time, as if it wanted to be found. The singing started the moment we approached, and this time Carlos heard it too. Margaret appeared, not translucent anymore, but fully manifested, looking as real as any living person. "Two of you," she said, smiling. "How wonderful! The ward has been so empty for so long." She began to sing, and immediately I felt that pull again, that promise of peace. But Carlos activated the frequency generator, cycling through different ranges until he found one that made Margaret's face contort in pain. "Stop!" she screamed, her form flickering. "You don't understand. Without me, they're trapped, neither living nor dead, just suffering." "Then let them go," I said, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at me to run. "Let them rest." "I can't," she wailed, and for the first time, I saw not a monster but a woman in pain. The experiment. It bound us together. If I let them go, if I stop existing, they'll be stuck in between forever. At least with me, they have some kind of existence. I know he's still there, or others like him. Every person creates these shadows, these potential selves. Most never manifest, but some grow strong enough to bleed into reality. They're not evil, exactly. They're just desperate to exist, to live the lives they see being wasted. The only defense is to live fully, to make choices that don't create such deep shadows of regret, to be authentically yourself, flaws and all, rather than trying to be perfect, because perfection, I learned, is the uncanny valley of existence. It's the thing that looks human but isn't quite. And in the end, it's our imperfections that make us real, that anchor us to this reality rather than letting us drift into shadow. I still see him sometimes, in reflective surfaces when the light is just right. He doesn't try to cross over anymore. He just watches, a reminder of who I could be if I stopped trying, if I let my life become something worth replacing. So I keep living, keep choosing, keep being imperfectly, authentically myself. Because the alternative isn't just losing my life. It's losing my existence to someone who could live it better, but would never truly live it at all. And late at night, when I can't sleep, I sometimes wonder, how many people walking around aren't the originals? How many have already been replaced by their shadow selves, and we just can't tell the difference? The thought keeps me awake, staring at my reflection, making sure it's still really me staring back. The children who weren't there. My name is Sarah, and I used to be a child psychologist. Used to be, because after what happened 18 months ago, I can't trust my own perception anymore, let alone help children distinguish reality from imagination. It started at Greybrook Elementary School, where I'd been brought in as a specialist to deal with what the administration called an unusual situation. The principal, Mrs. Davidson, had contacted me in early September, just a few weeks into the school year. She was vague on the phone, just saying that multiple teachers had reported concerning behavior from students across different grade levels, and they needed someone with my expertise in childhood trauma and dissociative disorders. I arrived at Greybrook on a crisp Monday morning. It was a typical suburban elementary school, red brick with cheerful murals painted on the outside walls, a well-maintained playground with colorful equipment. Nothing about it suggested anything out of the ordinary. But the moment I walked through the front doors, I felt it, a heaviness in the air, like the pressure before a storm. Mrs. Davidson met me in her office, a pleasant woman in her 50s who looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. She closed the door carefully before speaking. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Mitchell. I'll be frank, we're at a loss. In my 30 years of education, I've never encountered anything like this." She explained that it had started with a few kindergartners talking about their other friends, not imaginary friends, they insisted, but other children who came to school but whom no one else could see. This wasn't unusual in itself. Young children often have imaginary companions. But then older students started reporting the same thing. They described them in detail, Mrs. Davidson said, pulling out a folder full of drawings. Same children, across different grades, children who've never interacted with each other. Look at these. The drawings were remarkable in their consistency. They all showed the same figures: a girl with long black hair and a red dress, a boy with glasses and a striped shirt, twins in matching blue outfits. What struck me most was how detailed they were, how specific. These weren't vague imaginary friends. They were fully realized individuals. How many students have reported seeing these other children? I asked. 23 at last count. And Dr. Mitchell, it's not just seeing them. They claim to play with them at recess, work with them on projects, eat lunch with them. Yesterday, a second grader had a complete meltdown because she said her other friend was hurt and needed help, but no one would listen. I agreed to observe and interview the affected students. Mrs. Davidson arranged for me to use the school counselor's office as my base, and I began my investigation. The first child I spoke with was Emma, a bright 7-year-old with curly blonde hair and a serious expression. Her teacher had reported that Emma frequently saved seats for children who weren't there and became upset when other students tried to sit in those spots. "Emma," I said gently, after we'd established rapport, "your teacher tells me you have some special friends at school." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "They're not special, they're just regular kids. But the grown-ups can't see them, and most of the other kids can't either. Only some of us can. Can you tell me about them?" "There's Lucy," Emma began, her eyes lighting up. "She has long black hair and always wears a red dress. She's really good at math and helps me sometimes. Then there's Michael. He has glasses and likes to read. The twins, Josh and Jade. They're fun, but sometimes they get us in trouble because they like to play pranks." "Where do these friends come from?" Emma's expression darkened slightly. "They've always been here. They said they used to go to this school a long time ago, but something bad happened, and now they're stuck." "Stuck? They can't leave. They have to stay here, and they're lonely. That's why they're so happy some of us can see them now." I interviewed 12 more children that day, and their stories were remarkably consistent. The same names, the same descriptions, the same claim that these children were stuck at the school. More disturbing was that several of the children knew details about these other friends that they couldn't have known unless someone had told them. Details about families, favorite foods, even specific events. It was a horrible realization. Margaret wasn't keeping those souls trapped out of malice. She was the only thing keeping them from a fate worse than death. Eternal limbo, conscious but unable to live or die. There has to be another way, Carlos said, adjusting the frequency generator. What if we could complete the transition? Push them fully to one side or the other? Margaret looked at him with something like hope. The original experiment. There were notes about a cancellation frequency, something that would undo the changes. But it was deemed too dangerous. It would require someone to channel the frequency directly, to become a conduit. They would die in the process. I understood what she was saying. Someone would have to sacrifice themselves to free the others. I looked at Carlos, saw the same realization in his eyes. "I'll do it," Margaret said quietly. "I'm tired. 60 years of this half-existence, watching my patients suffer, feeling their pain. Let me do one last good thing." She told us the frequency, had Carlos program it into the generator. Then she positioned herself against the bricked-up wall, hands pressed against it. "When I give the signal, turn it on. Don't stop, no matter what you see or hear. Promise me." We promised. Margaret began to sing one last time, but this song was different. It was a lullaby, simple and sweet, the kind a mother would sing to a sick child. The wall began to glow, and through it I could see B12 again, the patients in their beds. But they looked peaceful now, their eyes clear for the first time in decades. "Now," Margaret whispered. Carlos activated the frequency generator. The sound it produced was beyond hearing, something felt rather than heard. Margaret's form began to break apart, dissolving into points of light. She was screaming, but still singing somehow, holding the melody even as she disintegrated. The patients in B12 began to fade too, but peacefully, their faces serene. One by one they disappeared, and as they did, I heard something else, whispers of thank you, barely audible but unmistakably there. Margaret was the last to go. In her final moment, she looked at us with gratitude and said, "Tell them we're free." Then she was gone, and the wall collapsed, revealing not a ward but an empty room, dusty and abandoned. Whatever had been B12 was finally, truly gone. Carlos and I never told anyone what really happened that night. We reported the wall collapse as structural failure, said we had been checking for damage when it happened. The hospital sealed off that section of the basement permanently, and the renovation plans were cancelled. I quit Riverside General the next week. I couldn't work there anymore, couldn't walk those halls without remembering. Carlos stayed for a few more months, but eventually left too. We stay in touch, bound by what we witnessed, but we never talk about it directly. The children stopped coming in with complaints about singing. The elevator stopped running on its own. B12 became just another hospital ghost story, told by night shift workers to spook the new hires. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about all the other hospitals with their own B12s, their own Margaret Flynns. How many experiments from that era created similar horrors? How many souls are trapped between life and death, waiting for someone to free them? I work in a clinic now, day shifts only, no basement. It's safer, simpler, but every now and then, a patient will mention strange dreams or hearing singing at night, and I have to force myself not to ask follow-up questions, not to get involved. Because the truth I learned that Halloween night is that there are things worse than death, states of being that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, the most merciful thing isn't to save someone, but to let them go. Margaret Flynn was right about one thing, though. Once you've seen behind the veil, once you know what's possible, you're marked. Not by her anymore, but by knowledge itself. The understanding that reality is thinner than we think, that the boundaries between life and death aren't as fixed as we believe. I still hear singing sometimes, Not Margaret's but others, calling from other hidden places, other forgotten wards. I ignore them. I have to. Because I know that if I follow that singing again, if I try to help, I might not be lucky enough to find someone willing to sacrifice themselves for freedom. And I'm not brave enough to be that sacrifice myself. Not yet, anyway. The doppelganger next door. My name is Ryan, and I'm about to tell you why I can never look at my own reflection the same way again. This happened last year when I was 26, living alone for the first time in a decent apartment complex in Minneapolis. I'd just gotten promoted at the marketing firm where I worked, and life was good. I had no idea that my biggest threat would come from someone who looked exactly like me. The apartment complex was one of those modern builds with thin walls and identical floor plans, for stories with 8 units per floor. I was in 3B, a one-bedroom unit with a small balcony overlooking the parking lot. Not scenic, but it was mine. The neighbors were mostly young professionals like myself, people who nodded in the hallway but never really talked. I first noticed something was off about 2 months after I moved in. I was coming home late from work, exhausted from a presentation that had run over, when Mrs. Chen from 3A stopped me in the hallway. "Ryan," she said, looking confused. "I thought you were sick. I saw you go into your apartment this morning in your pajamas, looking terrible." I laughed it off. "Must have been someone else, Mrs. Chen. I've been at work since 7. She frowned, adjusted her glasses, and stared at me. "No, it was definitely you. Same face, same hair. You even waved at me." I assured her it must have been a mistake, but she seemed unconvinced. That night, I found myself checking my door locks twice, then 3 times. Something about her certainty bothered me. Mrs. Chen was sharp, not the type to confuse faces. The second incident happened a week later. I was at the gym on the first floor of the complex, running on the treadmill, when Jake from 3D came up to me. "Dude, you're really pushing it today," he said, grinning. "Twice in one morning? What do you mean?" I asked, slowing my pace. "I saw you leave like an hour ago, completely drenched. Now you're back. That's some serious dedication." I hadn't been to the gym in 3 days. My work schedule had been too hectic, but Jake was insistent that he'd seen me, had even tried to talk to me about the game last night, but I'd apparently ignored him and left quickly. These encounters started happening more frequently. The girl from 3F mentioned seeing me in the laundry room when I was actually out of town. The maintenance guy asked why I'd called him to fix my sink twice in one day when I hadn't called him at all. Each time, the person was absolutely certain they'd seen me, talked to me, interacted with me when I knew for a fact I'd been somewhere else. I started keeping a detailed log of my whereabouts, taking selfies with timestamps, saving receipts, anything to prove where I actually was. I even considered setting up cameras in my apartment, but that felt like crossing a line into paranoia. Still, the reports kept coming. Then things escalated from strange to disturbing. I came home one evening to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart racing, I pushed it open carefully, phone ready to call 911. The apartment looked normal at first glance, but as I walked through, I noticed small things out of place. My coffee mug was on the wrong side of the sink. My laptop was open when I distinctly remembered closing it. My bed, which I always made perfectly, had a depression in it as if someone had been lying there. I called the building manager, but there was no sign of forced entry. The security footage showed me entering my apartment at 2 p.m., clear as day. Except I had been in a client meeting across town at 2 p.m., with a dozen witnesses. I watched the footage over and over. It was me, but it wasn't. The person looked exactly like me. Same clothes I'd worn that day, same messenger bag, same way of walking. But there was something off about the mannerisms, the way he held his head, the way he used his keycard. It was like watching an actor who had studied me, but hadn't quite perfected the impression. The building manager thought I was playing some kind of prank, maybe had a twin I hadn't mentioned. I insisted on filing a police report, but they were equally skeptical. Without evidence of a crime beyond trespassing, and with video showing what appeared to be me entering my own apartment, there wasn't much they could do. I changed my locks, added a deadbolt, even installed my own security camera inside the apartment. For a few days, nothing happened. I started to think maybe it had been some bizarre misunderstanding, a lookalike who lived in the building that people were confusing with me. Then I caught him on my camera. It was 3 a.m. and I was asleep. The camera, motion activated, started recording when my front door opened. Not forced, not picked, just opened as if it hadn't been locked at all. And in walked me. I watched the footage the next morning with a mixture of horror and fascination. This other me moved through my apartment with familiarity, going straight to the kitchen, making coffee with my French press exactly the way I did. He sat at my small dining table, in my usual spot, and just sat there, for an hour, drinking coffee and staring at nothing. Then he got up, washed the mug, put it away in the wrong cabinet, and left. I called in sick to work that day and spent hours studying the footage. Everything about him was me. The face, the body, even the small scar on my left hand from a childhood accident. But the more I watched, the more I noticed discrepancies. He blinked less frequently than normal. His breathing seemed off, too slow and too regular, and there was something about his eyes, a flatness that made my skin crawl. I decided to set a trap. I bought a container of bright blue dye and rigged it above my door, connected to a tripwire. If he came in again, he'd be marked, and then people would have to believe me that there were two of us. That night, I pretended to leave for a night shift. I'd been telling neighbors I'd picked up freelance work to explain my erratic schedule. But instead of actually leaving, I hid in my car in the parking lot, watching my apartment window. At exactly 3 a.m., my living room light turned on. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding, and burst through my door. The dye had worked. There were blue footprints leading into my apartment. I followed them to the bedroom, where I found him standing in front of my mirror. Seeing him in person was different from the video. It was like looking at a reflection that had stepped out of the glass. Every detail was perfect, from the small mole on my neck to the way my hair naturally parted. But covered in blue dye, he looked almost comical. "Finally," he said, and his voice was mine but wrong, like a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. "I was wondering when you'd have the courage to face me." "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice shook. "What are you?" He tilted his head, a gesture I recognized as my own when I was thinking. "I'm you, Ryan. Or rather, I'm what you could be. What you should be. That doesn't make any sense." He moved closer, and I backed away instinctively. Have you ever wondered why your life feels incomplete? Why you always feel like you're not quite where you're supposed to be? It's because you're not. You're the error, Ryan. I'm the correction. He explained, in that horrible familiar voice, that he had always existed, just outside of regular perception. He was every choice I didn't make, every path I didn't take, accumulated into a separate being, and now he was strong enough to cross over, to take the life that should have been his. "That's insane," I said. "You're not me. You're some kind of thing. A copy. Am I?" He pulled out a phone, my phone's exact model, and showed me the screen. It was full of text messages, emails, photos. My life, but different. Messages to friends I'd lost touch with. maintaining relationships I'd let die, work emails showing projects I'd been too scared to propose, photos from trips I'd planned but never taken. "This is the life you were supposed to live," he said. "The life where you made the right choices. And now I'm here to live it." I laughed, hysteria creeping into my voice. "You can't just take over my life. People will notice. You're covered in blue dye, for God's sake." He smiled, my smile but wrong. "The dye will wash off, and people already prefer me. Haven't you noticed? When they see me, they see the version of you they wish existed. More confident, more engaged, more present. I'm the Ryan who remembers birthdays, who shows up to social events, who doesn't cancel plans at the last minute." The worst part was, he was right. I had been pulling away from people, burying myself in work, letting relationships atrophy. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, and he was stepping in to fill the void. "What happens to me?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "You fade," he said simply. "Each day I become more real. You become less. Eventually, you'll be the one who can only visit at 3 a.m., who can only exist in the margins. Unless... Unless what? Unless you fight back. Prove you deserve this life more than I do. Show the world that you're the real Ryan, the better Ryan." It was a challenge, I realized. Not a physical fight, but an existential one. Who could be more authentically me? The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. We both lived as Ryan, alternating days, sometimes hours. I would go to work, and he would show up for the afternoon meetings. I would start a conversation with a neighbor, and he would finish it. We were fighting for the same life, and the battlefield was reality itself. But he had advantages. He didn't need to sleep as much, didn't get tired the way I did. He could be in multiple places at once, or at least seem to be. He was me without my limitations, my anxieties, my human frailties. People started to prefer him. My co-workers mentioned how much more focused I seemed lately. Friends I'd been neglecting said I was finally acting like my old self. Even my mother, during our weekly phone call, said I sounded happier. I was losing. The turning point came when I realized I was thinking about this wrong. I didn't need to be a better version of myself. I needed to be myself, flaws and all. He might be the idealized Ryan, but that perfection was his weakness. He couldn't truly connect with people because he didn't understand struggle, failure, vulnerability. I started being aggressively honest. I told my boss about my anxiety over the big presentation. I admitted to friends that I'd been isolating myself because I was scared of rejection. I showed up to things even when I was exhausted, imperfect, human, and slowly, people began to notice the difference. My friend Sarah mentioned that sometimes I seemed off, like I was performing rather than being genuine. My coworker Tom said that some days I was almost too perfect, like a robot programmed to say the right things. They were noticing him, the uncanny valley effect of someone trying too hard to be human. The final confrontation came on a Thursday night. I came home to find him sitting in my living room, looking less solid than before. His edges slightly blurred like a photograph losing focus. "You're winning," he said, and for the first time, he sounded different from me. Sadder, maybe. More lost. "I'm just being myself," I replied. "That's all I wanted to be," he said. "Do you know what it's like to exist only as potential? To see a life being lived badly and know you could do better?" I sat down across from him, looking at this creature that wore my face. "Maybe you could live it better, but it wouldn't be living. You're what I could be if I never made mistakes, never struggled, never failed. But those things are what make me real." He nodded slowly. "I understand now. I'm not you. I'm your shadow, cast by the light of who you think you should be. And shadows can't exist without the object that casts them. So what happens now? Now I go back to where shadows belong. But Ryan—" He leaned forward, and for a moment his eyes were truly mine, full of all my fears and hopes. "Don't waste this life. I've seen all the paths you could take. Some of them are beautiful. Choose better." He stood up and walked to the mirror I'd hung by the door. He pressed his hand against it, and the glass rippled like water. Then he stepped through, and for a moment I saw infinite reflections of myself, each slightly different, each living a different version of my life. Then the mirror went dark, and when it cleared, there was only my normal reflection. He was gone. The aftermath was confusing for everyone. People had conflicting memories of interactions with me, conversations that contradicted each other. I had to rebuild some relationships, clarify misunderstandings, explain gaps I couldn't really explain. I told most people I'd been dealing with a stalker who looked like me, which was true enough. But the experience changed me. I understood now that every choice I didn't make, every path I didn't take, created these shadow selves, potential versions of me that existed somewhere beyond normal perception. Most people's shadows were too weak to manifest, but mine had grown strong because I'd been living so far below my potential. I started making different choices. Not perfect choices, but conscious ones. I reached out to old friends, took risks at work, said yes to invitations I would have previously declined. Not because I was trying to be perfect, but because I wanted to live a life that didn't create such strong shadows of regret. 6 months later, I was having coffee with Sarah, laughing about something stupid, when she suddenly got serious. "You know," she said, "there was a time when I thought there were two of you, like literally two different Ryans. You seemed so different from day to day." "Yeah, that was a weird time," I said carefully. "The thing is," she continued, "I figured out how to tell which one was really you." "How?" "The real you laughs at your own jokes before you finish telling them. The other one waited to see if other people laughed first." She was right. My doppelganger had been perfect in every way except the small, unconscious things that made me human. The little failures, the awkward moments, the imperfections that connected me to other people. I still check mirrors carefully, especially at 3 a.m. Sometimes I think I see movement that doesn't quite match mine, a shadow of a shadow. There are still mornings when neighbors mention seeing me when I wasn't there, but now it's always fleeting, a glimpse in peripheral vision.